And just as you guys are getting settled, mic'd up and watered up, I wanted to, if you guys wanted to just start from the right and introduce yourselves and say a little bit about your roles at your respective firms.
Sure. Hi, Jessica Jensen from Facebook. I am in our B2B marketing group, which I heard previously is maybe not sexy. I like to think of it as extremely sexy. So we address the advertising market. I oversee outbound product marketing and brand strategy for all of our businesses that touch the advertising world. So that's Facebook, Instagram, Atlas, LiveRail, Audience Network, and now Messenger.
Hi, my name's Rob Waite. I'm the Vice President of Global Marketing for HP's $15 billion print business, so the laser jets, the inkjets, our solutions and services business. Globally scaled, I look after pretty much what most of you do. I look after the marketing communications components, our business strategy. We have a practice within the team on customer journey and also an insights team with us.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison Engel, Vice President of Marketing at LinkedIn, and I oversee 3 teams within the business. The first is an advertising team, very similar to Jessica's world. I also oversee our acquisition of lynda.com and our plan to build out a learning solutions business, and then also some other businesses that we're piloting within LinkedIn. So I have a mix of both B2B and B2C teams, and my teams really span the full stack of marketing, from product marketing to demand generation, marketing communications, and then also regional teams. So it's a fun dynamic mix. We're excited to spend some time with you guys.
And let me just say, it would have been really awkward if the findings were not very favorable about the outlook of social media earlier today. But I wanted to actually start out with you guys because I think that one of the things that people are very interested these days is the whole entire idea of segmenting your customer base and finding innovative ways to do that really cut through the clutter. So what are some ideas that you can offer up, from a general prescription standpoint about how organizations should be thinking about targeting and then going about it?
Well, I think we are in this digital mobile world that we live in. We have an incredible opportunity and wealth of data and insight available to us to segment. Obviously, it's extremely different for every kind of business, if you're B2B focused or consumer, depending on the vertical. I think that, figuring out who you're trying to reach and testing and learning across a lot of different wonderful platforms is the only way to know what will work. One of the questions that you had asked us, in preparation is how much segmentation and how much targeting is right. And of course, that's, again, very different for every business. I will say that in the Facebook and Instagram worlds, we see, sometimes you're trying to reach 50 million people or 100 million people with a Super Bowl promotion, and sometimes you're trying to reach moms 24 to 34 in Texas, both of which are completely feasible, but we do sometimes see over-segmentation or over-targeting. And that when you are, you think your target segment is that group of moms in a certain area, well, maybe you're leaving out the dads who may have interesting buying habits that you are not addressing. Or moms a little bit older may do things that you're not aware of. So I think that testing is so achievable now and doable now that it just makes it, a wealth of opportunity.
Yeah, and I think to me, it kind of starts with you need to have a team and an organization that wants to listen, and so and prioritize that. Like, I think for a lot of marketing communications professionals, the focus can be extremely outbound. Like, we have a message, we have a product, we need to get it to market. I think you also have to spend ideally the same amount of resource kind of ingesting information and data and analytics and listening and doing your own market research to understand how people are responding to those messages. I think Jessica's exactly right, especially for LinkedIn. We're targeting for our advertising products is kind of the core value proposition of those products. We do see clients making the mistake of going too niche with targeting and just getting too narrow, especially in a B2B sense. You can talk to a lot of B2B marketers and they feel like they have such a clear sense of who that audience is, but there are always people influencing decisions, right? Even in the consumer world, I guess if it's a small consumer good, maybe people aren't influencing each other's, deodorant purchases. Maybe they are if you have a vocal spouse or partner or friend. But on any other larger purchase, there are generally many people involved in that decision-making process. And so mapping out who those decision makers are is also an important part of determining your segmentation.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to segmentation, I'm in a business where we have to make stuff up front. I don't know how many of you are in that. We actually make a physical product. So you have to go into that really very clear on who your segments are. There's just no way that you can do it without that. But when you get down into this pivot as marketers of trying to find out where your product is really resonating, I think this thing on segmentation, it becomes an ongoing weekly study of your analytics. I mean, what we're doing the whole time is tracking it back to who is responding to products. We have a product which we launched the other week. It was aimed at student dorms, and what we're finding is it's ending up being used in offices, and we totally didn't plan for that, and suddenly we're going to be calling you on the B2B space to market something that's taken off because it's a small product that fits within an office space. That was not what it was designed for necessarily, and finding those as marketers, that's where the growth is. So go segment, like always. So much more data you can get at now to get at it easily. These guys have got some of that. Sorry.
I have an anecdote. You've reminded me, I think, the listening point and then the finding segments you didn't know about. We just recently launched an ad format, a lead gen ad format, which allows people to do pre-filled forms in lead gen ads on Facebook. We thought that was a product for financial services and professional services and education, et cetera. And so that's who we marketed it to. And then we come to find out that it's huge with retailers. So we completely missed that. Now we're reallocating some of our, other spend. So I mean, the listening, I think, is really key.
The other key part of segmentation that we've learned over time is there's a decision maker, and then there's often people that are going to be implementing the solutions or the products you're selling. And so, yes, you need to think about the segmentation and getting into the hearts and the minds of the decision maker, but then you also have to take the step of who's actually going to use the product within a company, right? How do they apply it? How do you make them successful? And we've seen the need to do that with our audience, right? For most of our business lines, we're targeting senior managers or directors or budget owners of the various products LinkedIn sells. But at the end of the day, for our recruiting products, there's someone in the recruiting team who's in the recruiter tool who needs to understand it. We need to onboard them and make them successful. For our marketing products, it's the same. There's a company page administrator for a company that's touching their content products. And so, again, mapping out all of the people that not only make the decision, which is, I think, where oftentimes people might stop or think that that's kind of the core focus. Your brand and company will be more successful if you're going to take it all the way through to think about the audiences who are using the products every day.
So one thing, when we're talking about using products every day from a targeting perspective, there's so much data that's at our disposal right now in terms of customizing journeys. And I think one thing that a lot of people are wondering about is how much customization is too much customization. Can you go too far to the point that you are, let's say, marketing to somebody because they're a mom who has a 4-year-old, and you know too much about that person, and it becomes a little disconcerting to the end user? What are the negatives, and how do you actually avoid those pitfalls?
So there's a definite creepy factor. I'm sure every marketer in the room knows that we have access to vast amounts of data. Those of you in the device markets, like I am, when we look at Internet of Things sensors coming along, I mean, that's growing at 15-20% CAGR. We've got data flowing that allows you to know way too much. That being said, the insight, I saw a study from the Corporate Executive Board, and if you follow those guys, and they'd done a study of folks who were just trying to work out what the right level of personalization was. I was reading in preparation for this. And what you find in the end is Occam's razor is applying in most of these cases. People want to get through processes seamlessly, quickly, easily, and we make an awful lot about getting into, hyper-micro targeting. Most people want to get through a transaction pretty simply, pretty briskly. They have a Goldilocks scenario, which is not so little information they can't make a choice, and not so much that with beaconing and everything, we can figure out if you picked up a product in Dubai, I can retarget you when you land back in Heathrow. That's probably not what you need to do. What you need to do is to help them through their transaction and the work that they need to get done, and just make it seamless and quick. Speed continues to be a big differentiator in these things. I don't know if you guys guys have?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the two words I would say, one is the simplifying. So where something personal can simplify a decision is I think is key. And I think it still goes back to the human behavior of like you have one chance to make a first impression, right? So the idea of the more you can have something that is personal, I think still really applies, but it should be helpful, right? And I think you need some data ideally to make that first personalized outreach. Where we've had a lot of success with some of our self-serve products is when we have someone in our advertising platform, and we can see that if they didn't win an auction to invest in one of our products, our sponsored content product, we can see that they didn't bid enough. So we might have an email back to them that now is automated saying, if you bid X, this is where the auction cleared. We try to provide recommendations for people to kind of be successful the next time. So I think the more data you have, but I think it just goes back to how can you be helpful with it. I think if you are overly personal very early in the process and someone hasn't given you permission to do that, then I think that's then I think you can find yourself in a little bit of trouble.
I think great points, not a bunch to add. I just think like in the mobile world now, the consumer's in complete control of what they consume, and so you have to be relevant. You have to fit into their experience and the utility they're seeking. And so the bar is higher for us as marketers, but then also the opportunity to reach people in a very personal setting with a personalized message. And again, I kind of go back to this mom-dad schism. I think, some of the CPG brands have done some really interesting marketing to dads about diapers and things that, we would never have done before, but you can find a dad on a phone at 2 a.m. and give him a diaper ad. And that's really exciting and relevant and super different from a mom.
Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to be consistent. I mean, customers tell us, through our own studies, the vast majority, the Pareto of folks, they want personalization. They want it at some level. There's a much lower percentage of them that are really willing or happy. It's like 55% of folks are actually really happy when you over-personalize, or even if you personalize a bit. So a lot of our websites and services, we were picking up a lot of data anonymously, and what we found as a best practice, I'm sure some of you are doing this already too, is we absolutely divulge where we're getting the data from, what we're going to use it for, and how it's going to be used to customers, because I'm in the B2B services side too, and there, you just want to be really transparent about what you're doing, what you're going to use the data for. Just collecting it and then feeding it back, I think, is a real no-no on these kind of services.
So how about, I guess a follow-up on that is, and this is something that I think that we've heard, is that it's not necessarily about trying to prove, look how much data I have, like to show an African-American woman in Chicago, a picture of an African woman in Chicago, right? It's about using data in smart ways, so changing the color of a button because you notice that a certain demographic responds better to it, which then goes back to Rob's point about personalization. So I'm just wondering, when you especially HP is a little bit different, but when you're looking to learn from brands, what are some of the insights that you've pulled from brands and are learning from people who are using specifically, I guess, LinkedIn and Facebook as platforms? I'd be curious to hear what you're learning from brands.
What we're learning from brands about how they make their marketing more effective?
Exactly.
What we've seen, and we talked a little bit about it, was kind of the notion of testing. And for our advertising products, more than half of our revenue comes from sponsored content in the LinkedIn feed, very similar to the world of Facebook. And everything is kind of moving to a native ad format, right, for web and on social, just because they perform so much better. But it's just, again, it's hard to know exactly kind of what is the right headline, what's the right image. And in social media, that's crucial. Like, people read the headline or they engage with the image. And that kind of defines how they jump into the funnel with you. And what we've seen is most of our advertisers, is not just the luxury of larger brands that might have more resources, smaller brands too, see that if they can experiment with different headlines and experiment with different images, they get a better sense of, for their audience, what is the tone, in the meaning of that first engagement. And then they can see that in the data of what the performance is. What's the click-through rate? How is it performing once that audience lands on the marketer's destination? And we see clients kind of, canceling certain creatives and investing more money in the creatives that are working. So the idea that you're managing at that level, which seems pretty tactical, but it matters a lot, as you guys know, with the amount of volume and engagement people are looking for.
Exactly the same, and then I would just add, in terms of working with a lot of brands that are trying to figure out how to take TV and make it work for mobile video on Facebook and other platforms, learning a ton from them about, how do you crop imagery differently than you would on TV. Most people watch mobile video with the sound off, so then you have to, put text and titling and change your logo placement. So we're constantly learning a bunch about how to optimize photography on Instagram, video. It's just a raft of input and morphing.
And I think the brands, just what we're seeing is, it's not by accident that the three of us end up on a panel talking about this topic. The traditional large agency model, it's not dead, but it must smell funny, right? There's
somebody's going to tweet that right now.
There's just a lot of change going on between how you work your creative with your partners, with your own brand stories, and it all revolves around being less big brother and more big mother, making sure that you know what it is your customer wants and you go and deal with them. And it's not necessarily about one single piece of big creative that you blow out everywhere. It's just not. It's a digital journey, and it's changing. These guys are driving a lot of it, but you all are too. It's how do you get in there and just think differently about what you're taking in every day. It's not one big campaign. That logic is also horribly eroded in the past 5 years, driven by all these data and insights. So there's something tectonic happening between the large agency structures, the providers of the data, and how we all collaborate. And it's in that collaboration model for most of the folks doing what I do. It's how you collaborate between all those groups.
Rob, that's a key point, though, because I think that is a major change. And what we've learned is that over the last, I would say, probably 5 years, that content marketing has become not a nice to have, or it is the core to, I think, how brands think about their brand expression, moving away from, there are still big campaigns, there are still big news cycles that companies are trying to own. But on a day in and day out basis, it's that continuous engagement. Because think about your own media usage. You're on your phone in the morning, you're at work, you're on a tablet, you are seamlessly moving between all these environments. You're not waiting for the next big news. There might be a couple brands that you follow that closely, but most you're not. You're kind of living your life, and brands are trying to find a way to integrate with that. And so I think the continuous kind of campaign structure is also a huge change, and the most successful companies we've worked with have kind of embraced that. When we first got into the sponsored content business on LinkedIn several years ago, Facebook and Twitter had been there for a while, and people said, how do we do it on LinkedIn? I can do content. What's professional content? What does that look like? And they had a hard time thinking through kind of their content strategies, and we've evolved from that meaningfully. And now companies have kind of an always-on strategy for all of these major channels, and that's just what it takes. They've moved away from some of their campaigns, and if they do have large campaigns on TV, which obviously is still a key channel, they're finding ways to incorporate that into social media. And so the idea that your brand is always on is a crucial part of it, but it's an operational change for some companies, absolutely, and it has been for us on the marketing side. But as we started to change our resource allocation and build a content marketing team and a social team and have the analytics to back it up, we've seen that more than half of the leads for our B2B businesses come through those always-on channels. They come through search, they come through paid social, less so other channels, and they come through our blog. Our blogs are now kind of our lifeline for our businesses, especially on the B2B side, but even on the B2C side, where we use them to communicate to the LinkedIn membership. So building that infrastructure, I think, has been a key change for the last kind of 5 years.
So I know that some of you guys are incentivized, for one answer versus another for this, but I'm curious, there are a lot of people who grew up thinking that brand is everything and brand consistency is the most important thing in the world, and everybody knows that you should be marketing your brand through digital channels as much as possible, but then you're giving up a little bit of that brand consistency. You're letting people weigh in on your content marketing. You're doing UGC on social platforms. You're doing things that maybe are very scary because you're open to having your brand be interpreted a little bit differently. And I know some of us heard how Intel is taking some strides to open up their brand, but how scary is that lack of consistency that digital marketing opens up for a brand? And is there a right amount? Should you try to have some type of brand core, or should you just, essentially crowdsource everything?
You should take that.
Yeah, at least start. And then, so nothing's really changed. Your brand is everything. I mean, how could it not be everything to you, what your brand is? What your brand is going to be doing is you're going to be reinventing that brand, bouncing up against these channels, bouncing up against your customers. So I don't think anything's fun for a brand marketer. I'm not sure anything, if you grew up in CPG or you've come from that, nothing really changed. What you have to do, and I get to review all of our social marketing worldwide coming in. What you have to do as a leader for your area, and you've got to set up a tight frame and a white canvas. There are going to be some things which Jen was talking about, which you're going to do, which you might not have planned to do, would not come out of an ideal brainstorming of everything you're going to do. But you're going to try and be true to yourself, and you're going to have some absolute guidelines. Let me give you just a concrete example. We've just done Mother's Day here in the US, right? For a company like HP, it is not okay to say, hey, it's Mother's Day, I bet you'd love some flowers and an HP printer. That is not okay, right?
No flowers, just printers.
That's not okay. I mean, that's not who we are, right? And so we're very clear about that. You can celebrate Mother's Day, you can be part of it, you can see the very best companies in the world doing it, but trying to shill one thing into the other is not who we're about. We're about trying to make a contribution to the welfare and humanity of the world by making genuine progressions in technology that enable humanity. That's what we're about. We don't trade that off. I don't care where we are. We don't trade that off, right? So some things change, some things never change. Quote the Matrix.
I mean, I think the brand, I totally agree with what Rob was saying, and I think it goes back to, the sense of kind of control, and that you have this walled garden, and perfect punctuation around your brand. Without input, certainly those days are over. But I think it still goes back to the core of, do you understand your company, right? And you have a lot of conviction for your brand and your products. And you'll get some good reviews and some not so good reviews. That is just the way it's going to fall. And so when you read the not so good reviews or feedback from your audiences or customers, it certainly stings a little bit for anyone who's passionate about it. But you need to hear that feedback. And I think when you have a lot of conviction about what you're doing, you've done the market research, you understand your value props, you know why you're there, you know what the products stand for, it's easier to take some of those bullets because you know you're on a certain path and you're moving forward. But the idea that you need to take and embrace that feedback and have skilled people that know how to respond. I think you've seen the countless case studies of when brands have tried to respond in social media to make a correction or we didn't mean to say that, but here's what we meant to say, and it just gets worse and worse. So you do need a company culture to respond and engage at the right time, and skilled people that know how to kind of manage these channels. But I think the idea that your brand is still core, that hasn't changed, and you have to care for it and nurture it, but you have to be open to the feedback. But if you know what that core is, it's easier to, I think, accept the sense of control and the voice that consumers have.
So excellent points. I also think it can be really fun, and we should be excited about it, right? If you look at what, I think about Lego, Oreo, Purina, what people have done with and for those brands on Instagram and Facebook is beautiful and fun and heartwarming. And so feeling not so precious about your brand, but letting people play with it, I think makes people trust you more. Yeah. And expands your equity. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Unless you ignore people.
I do some work with Disney.
Respond poorly.
Yeah. I do some work with Disney. They're a partner of ours, a technology partner as well as. And I watch in awe how they manage their content. If you want to go and look, Purina and Oreo are doing phenomenal jobs. But some of these companies, they're just worth looking at. Look at how Disney produces. They produce thousands of pieces of content a day. They've got 1.5 billion followers on Facebook, something crazy like that. You can do this stuff without getting off base. The point being, you don't, just because you brush up against social media doesn't mean you have to lose track of who you are and what you are to the world around mean, I see that with Disney every day. They do an amazing job.
And creating the same theme is around transparency, right? There's a huge opportunity with social media and digital platforms to create so much more transparency about brands and companies. One great example that I've seen that they use across platforms is GE. And so GE years ago, so this is a couple years back, had a digital marketing executive who pushed that company and was really on the cutting edge, and they opened up their factory floors and took these amazing photographs of kind of everything that happens at GE, and they had these wind turbines, and they had their jet engines, and like it's this extraordinary, like if you go back to your childhood favorite books of like how the world works, like these extraordinary photographs of what was going on at GE factories at headquarters, they blow your mind. And so they were in feeds around the web. But no one had ever seen, no one had been, unless you had like a certain security clearance, no one was behind, the iron walls of, a GE factory before, and they were extraordinary. And so I think you can also really take a different, almost like an inside-out view of your company and the assets you have and showcase them in a unique way. And the transparency and the creativity, I think of just one example of how GE did it was extraordinary.
One thing I want to throw in there that, we're talking about without specifically mentioning is the integration of online and offline. And I think more and more people are looking at digital as not just a silo, like we're going to hire a digital person and they're not going to touch on the offline world, but we have more omni-channel and multi-channel integrations. And what's the smart way to do that? I know it's hard to be prescriptive for every type of audience out there, but should every business be looking to integrate the online and offline, or are there some that it's particularly more important? What advice can you offer in that area?
So we have a big retail business, right? So we have this conversation, and it's migrating. Large chunks of it are migrating online. We're seeing that at different rates around the world. I mean, 3% in Turkey, but you might be up at 35-40% in, say, the UK, and higher than that in some categories in the US. So this is a constant topic of conversation about. It's not all negative for bricks and mortar folks. In general, you're going to see probably less focus on bricks and mortar as people get ready for omni-channel selling. But the key here is finding out what your customers want to do. We were just talking, actually, I was just down in Palo Alto this morning talking to one of a major retail partner of ours. And they were actually seeing changes that they were not expecting, a bit like we were talking about, track the data, follow what's happening with the data, between folks going online and then buying in store. And so the drive to use things like beaconing, being able to use the in-store retail space as showroom areas, those are the brave new world for mixing up between your offline and online world. There are some vendors who are they're not just not going to do bricks and mortar, but for most of us, we live in a blended reality where we have digital assets and physical assets, and then sometimes you just have to run down to the store and buy some milk, right? I mean, there's just some things that and it's the biggest single challenge you have, but as long as you keep that sense we were talking about earlier about, keep it simple, keep it crisp, and don't stray into creepy, just because I beaconed something and you picked up a PC, then do I then follow you and track you, geotag you? No, right? You've got to think about it just like you would at a social occasion. And that's fundamentally how we think about online, offline, is we're trying to make sure that if any of us were to meet after the event here, we're going to try and talk to each other as human beings trying to find out what you want to do. You don't try and say, hey, I just looked you up on LinkedIn. It's absolutely fascinating. You don't do that, right? So I think this blending of online, offline, I saw last Tuesday you were at the same, you just don't want to do that. So I think this focus on what do people really need, and it's insights driven, right? And I think these guys, particularly Facebook has phenomenal assets in that space. We're doing a lot of work with you on our subscription services, same way. So I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the journey of your target customers and consumers, and kind of what can you offer that is in person, that meets what they're looking for, right? What are they trying to accomplish when they come into a store? How can you accomplish and help them, right, in a digital environment? And ideally, they complement each other and work together, and kind of take the experience yourself. Like if it's a high consideration product, you probably will spend a lot of time reading about it. online, but then when you go into the store, hopefully it's not the same experience. I mean, it should be consistent to the brand, but probably they're coming to sit in the car, or get used to the piece of furniture, or get used to the paint colors, whatever it is. Like, they're taking that extra step to engage with you offline. And there are so many powerful ways to use that experience. You could argue that still the face-to-face interaction that someone has, to touch, to feel, to smell, whatever it is, the product, is crucial. You can't do that in a digital environment, although maybe someday it'll happen.
Smell-o-vision.
But I think, yeah, exactly. There you go. But I think you need to holistically plan it, right? Here, the buyers we're trying to target, where do they spend time? Of course, they're spending time online. They spend time in stores. What does that store experience, need to be? And certainly for retailers, that is still a crucial part of the brand and the promise.
And that's what this excuse me, the in-store experience, it becomes much more of a service play, because shopping online, I don't know how many of you are actually selling products online, but shopping on price, if you let it as a business person, the whole thing can devolve into a price discussion, right? You go between who's got free shipping, What the smartest players are doing is realizing that when you go offline, there's the opportunity to value add. You look at the TV business as a classic example right now of one that has completely failed to see the service opportunity. They've been shrinking flat. Everybody here's got flat panels, right? It's price, and they're shrinking 20 to 30% a year for the past 3 years, right? As technology marketers, we can do better than that. I think that's where offline is a boosting opportunity for all of our business, but by providing what people actually want.
No, it's fine. I was just going to give another couple of examples. So I think a couple of industries that we've seen that have been maybe a little bit slower than others to Facebook and to social have been, oddly enough, filmed entertainment and TV, and also autos. But now we're seeing really great examples of either TV promotions of movies, or out of home, or TV promotions of autos that then they drive all the way through the journey to driving people into a dealership for a test drive, or download an app about a car, and then after you purchase, then that app becomes your service provider. So taking, I think, that entire journey from awareness to loyalty and service through offline is becoming very feasible, very effective. And then I'll just share a hilarious anecdote from my life, which I just think is such an indication of where I work. I literally had to fight to get budget to do an out-of-home campaign for Facebook B2B, and the people are like, what do you mean? We do digital. We only do... I was like, well, people do live in the offline world, and occasionally are spotted there. Yeah. So we should try to reach them with some messages. But I just think it's such a funny flip that, like, I have to persuade people that non-digital matters.
Oh, yeah. We're in the sort of post real world era, right, where our spend is like 60-70% online. We have the same thing. Yeah. You want to do something?
Why would you want to do
that? Yeah. And yet they're remarkably effective, right? When they pop into our models, they're huge.
So just want to, I think, maybe ask one final thing before we run to questions. So for each of you, especially those of you who run major social platform initiatives, I'm curious, you can't go over everything that you're most excited about from a targeting perspective, but if you had to pick one or two things that you're paying attention to right now on Facebook and LinkedIn that you're proud of, or that you think more marketers should know about, what would it be? And then, Rob, what's something that you happen to use from a targeting perspective, anywhere in the digital landscape?
Couple things. So I just some targeting things. So I'm kind of an international culture dork, and so we've done some interesting things that I think are really fun. Because Facebook, we have like 1.6 billion people using Facebook around the planet, and we know a lot about them. So we've created like a Ramadan celebrant cluster, Diwali celebrants, people who are fans of the Cricket World Cup. So these like cross-border global clusters of people with very specific lifestyles or interests, and reaching, Indian expats living in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's just really like crazy cool, what we can do. And when you go to Unilever or P&G and companies and say, would you like to reach, Arabic-speaking moms in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, that's just not been possible before, so that's really, really fun. And then I think the world of messaging is just so fascinating and exploding. 6 out of 10 of the most used apps in the world are messaging apps. And I know a lot of people in this room are using them, but I want to assure you that everyone in Southeast Asia and a lot of parts of the world live their lives on these apps. And so the ability to engage with people around commercial exchanges and provide awesome customer service experiences and commercial experiences through these apps, I think is going to just be ginormous.
So on the LinkedIn side, for us, obviously the core asset when it comes to marketing is the first-party data we have on the LinkedIn profile, and so that's the sweet spot for how companies engage with us, is being able to target people based on their title, the industry that they're in, and location, and other skills and education, and all those can be packaged in different ways, and that's kind of been our sweet spot since we started our advertising business years ago. The next layer of that has been to, for all the B2B marketers in the room, enable account-based marketing on the platform. So we're doing more to enable marketers to bring their own data to LinkedIn. Facebook has a lot of our best capabilities here too. But we know that it's not just about the first-party platforms, that marketers like Rob and team have a huge amount of their own data, and they want to bring that. And so the ability to match and mix kind of the data that marketers have and augment and complement the data that we have is really powerful. I think the last piece for us has been the success of content on LinkedIn. I think if you were to ask people 5 years ago, people had less of perception of LinkedIn as a publishing platform, and I think that perception has meaningfully changed, and it's had a huge impact on kind of how companies can build a presence and engage with the audiences that matter most to them through sponsoring content on the platform.
Yeah, I think to just build off that, the targeting used to be something that was kind of expensive and difficult to do. So what we've seen, and we work a lot with Gillette. So Gillette has exactly the same kind of business model idea, right? We sell something to our customers. We usually make a huge loss on it by the time when we give it to them, and then as they use it, we pick up the slack sort of thing. So we're very interested in finding clusters of people who shave a lot, or in my case, print a lot, right? That's what we want to do, right? And if you don't print, I'm not nearly as fascinated by you as if you did. And targeting and finding those people has been a complicated business model. The finding those users, those types, those most valuable customers was incredibly onerous and expensive to do for us. What both Gillette and the Gillette guys and us, we were talking about, like, what was the biggest thing you did that changed the most in your marketing system? And we had both Facebook and LinkedIn. We were on the phone and we were talking about what is it we do that actually makes a huge difference day to day. Do you know what it was? It was actually getting physically in a room together between our agencies, Facebook, LinkedIn, and actually being in a room together and planning out how do we go and target those most valuable groups. What can we do? It is not done through phone calls. It's not done on conference calls. It's not done by a sales visit. It is done by hard, get them in a room, sit down with them for 2 days. I was expecting something involving like, ERP solutions, and so it's still get them in a room, figure it out, and then you can work out these guys have vast amounts of data. I have scads of usage data coming in, more than I can know what to do with. And then as marketers, we're not really that interested in what happens in 2 years' time, right? I mean, it's kind of like, what can I impact within my horizon of execution and get it done? And we've made huge strides working with both platforms simply by sitting down and looking at what they have data-wise. And we don't need vast analytics teams, and we don't need to buy specialized data bumps, and we don't have to have Switzerland places where neutral data can bounce against each other. We can do most of it right there, right now. It's never been easier for us. It's things like low ink alerts and things like that, and it's never been easier to operationalize that. Our costs are down and our effectiveness is up 6x. 6x. I don't know about you guys, I don't get to see that every day on my programs.
So listen, I think we could probably go on for a lot longer, but I think there are some questions about personalization and targeting. I think I see one hand here, one hand over here.
Thank you. I have a question on unforgettable experiences. So when it comes to the word unforgettable, that often comes along with the newest and latest and hottest technology using that. So what I'm talking about is VR and AR. What are you thinking about that topic? Is it something you consider already for Messenger, for example, or on LinkedIn for certain systems and services? Or are there other technologies you think and recommend for us as marketers to think more about it in the near future?
So we bought a company called Oculus, and I mean, we definitely, Mark Zuckerberg and our technology leaders think that VR is like the next platform for computing that will completely change our lives. So we're super excited about it and invested in it. I will say that shiny object syndrome for marketers is something that we're keenly concerned about. And I think like when we meet with our clients, we're like, you know, people spend 75% of their time in 4 mobile apps. On their 70% of the time on phones in 4 mobile apps. Are you sucking the marrow out of all marketing opportunities there before you start thinking about VR and AR and smell-o-vision? You know, not to say that those things won't be important and that we shouldn't experiment, but to not get kind of over-rotated on it. That being said, there are companies doing really cool stuff, certainly in the gaming and entertainment industries in VR. I always cite this example. Audi created, you can have a VR experience where you create your custom Audi and then drive it on the moon. That's a pretty fun thing to do. So like there's going to be lots of clever, interesting exploration over the next 2 to 3 years, but for most marketers, making sure that you're doing great targeting, creative testing, and measurement on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Google is where you should spend 92% of your time.
Hi. Question about do this, don't do that. In your experience thinking about building great customer journeys, what have you seen where you went, don't do that? And where you
just the ones
instead
that we've
say,
done?
it's looking at your clients, it's looking at things that have happened, but we're out to build great customer journeys. The idea is to try and understand that end-to-end experience. What would you say has worked well or not worked well in your observation, both ends, if you could?
Yeah, so I've been very active on customer experience development for a while. I did HP's prior to the split. I did all of our customer experience work. You know, actually I do this every year. Every time we do these. Can I just see hands up? How many people actually here have a customer journey for their company, a standardized customer journey? So if you look around, so the biggest fundamental first step is actually have a customer journey that you're all standardized on. Everyone with the hands up, you're really smart, right? I mean, that's the number one thing. The other thing is that helps you cut to the chase. Like I always say, marketers, we're awesome, right? I mean, we're really interested in what gets me 90% of the benefit with 30% of the effort. Most of the effort is going to come from 1 or 2 moments of truth. You know, you check into a hotel, guess what? It's the check-in moment. The room could be bad, the shampoo could be dreadful. What really matters is when you check in, right? And so focusing on those couple of moments of truth, you know, for me, for my category, right, it's when you set it up, and then the moment is when you go and buy ink or toner for the first time. We focus, so if you look at us, we have a product called Instant Ink. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Instant Ink addresses those 2 pain points for a customer, makes it super easy and super cheap. Buy it now. You can go online and get it. But it's that, I think that having this real clarity of thinking about what the moment of truth is for your category, for your product, for your sale. And if you don't know that, and you can't walk around your company and all be aligned on it, that's going to be the biggest single indicator that it's not right, because then everybody's feeding different parts of the elephant and can't work out. That, in my opinion, that's it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the 2 things I would add, one would be on the didn't work side is if when we've run campaigns or run launches where we didn't bring the entire teams together around that journey. So we might have, we're marketing at a pretty reasonable scale at LinkedIn. And so if we're changing a product, Facebook too, or you're deprecating a product, and you don't have your customer support team looped in with a script and being ready, all of a sudden they have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people wondering why a change was made. And they're like, thanks, marketing, what's going on with the products today? And so we now have our customer operational team, as very close cousins. So I think and I think that's true of any scale of business, like whoever is touching those customers, if it's from the sales team to the marketing team, to whoever is in a support role, they all have to kind of be first-class passengers on a campaign, not kind of left behind. I think that's a big one. The second is, and it's obvious, I think, but really carving out the time on the measurement piece. As we ramped more of our own marketing analytics, we found that we had an 80-20 rule, surprise, surprise, and 20% of our campaigns were driving 80% of our lead volume. And so you have lots of marketers who like to do lots of stuff and be very initiative-driven and program-driven, and everyone comes with their objectives for the quarter, and they're running off the page in 4-point font, and you're thinking, we don't need to do all this, right? And you don't want to stifle the creativity and the innovation and entrepreneurship in your company, but you want to get people rallied around the big stuff. And if you make the big moments awesome, that's what will have the biggest impact.
The ability to run around the room with a mic is a very underrated skill in life, by the way, so props.
Thank you for the hustle. Work for a video production company, focused on video creative. And when I come to events like this, obviously we talk about customer segmentation, talk about all that's possible in terms of the customer journey. And then I look at the stats industry-wide in terms of the disconnect, in terms of still the proportion of spend that's on TV versus digital. So there's something structural going on in the industry that we're not fully addressing in these conversations. And I'm curious what the panel's perspective is on what those things could be. I mean, I heard one comment about, traditional agency models and focus on tentpole events. That's potentially one culprit. There's, the decoupled media creative world, potentially another culprit. Maybe just all of this conversation is too daunting for a lot of people. There's just too much to absorb. What do you think is the root cause of still the massive proportion of TV spend versus digital when all this other stuff is possible so much more richly in a digital world?
This is an excellent question. I think it's multiple dynamics, right? Change is hard. It takes time. Agencies have very well-worn cow paths. But things do change, right? We've definitely seen the shifts of money out of print into digital. TV is certainly struggling, so I think things are changing. I'd say the biggest thing that we encounter, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, we can grab a coffee afterwards, but, persuading creatives that a small screen is not small, right? If you ask any creative person, they're like, I'm going to make an awesome TV commercial, it's going to be huge. And, this is sort of insulting, right? And trying to get them to understand that, people are hyper-focused on this super personalized visual experience, and probably, and we have actually research that shows, paying more undivided attention to this than to a TV where your kid's coming through, you got some macaroni working, but getting people to understand that the small screen is not small is a huge hurdle.
I'd just say that TV is, if there's a myth running around the room that somehow TV is a buggy whip, I think that's incorrect. If you want to play in the TV space, that's amazingly effective with the right problem. So, some people are going to be there because they've got their models, and guess what? It kicks ass. It's really, really good. The piece that keeps on challenging you, I think back to this part on the small screen, is making sure that that everything becomes snackable too, so the content is real small, and that can be real challenging too, because our traditional campaign models are, hey, let's have a huge idea, let's have a huge movie, and that is, to your point, right? That piece is change management, thinking about your campaigns differently. The way I learned to put campaigns together. That's not what we're doing anymore. And every time we go away, I go, wow, it's so much simpler when I just briefed in a TV ad in New York, right? That was so much easier. And I think that's just going to take longer than we think. We see it happen to print. We see it happen to TV now. I think it just takes longer than pundits would have you believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word is that it's simple. So I started my career in TV, so I'm thankful for the medium. It got me started, but I think one, it's structural, so it is very easy to buy TV spots. Like, it's hard to, I think, make a great TV commercial. And there's still a perception that is storytelling at scale. And I think Jessica's point is right. Like, how do you do storytelling at scale in content formats or mobile formats, which is where people are spending their time? And so there's an infrastructure that makes it very easy to buy TV advertising. It's expensive, and again, it's hard to do the creative. But once you're kind of done, you kind of set it and forget it. And nothing in digital and social is set it and forget it. And so I think the idea that the content piece is harder to do, and there is more testing, it's kind of different machinery. But the growth is in digital and social and on the web. Like, the growth has not been right on the TV side. Will there always be a market for mass communication? I mean, no question. And there could be some really interesting innovation and disruption that happens there. But I think it's there for a reason, and I think the brands that know how to work it, make amazing progress. But I think, and the gap is closing. I don't know the latest numbers, but the gap between the mediums is closing meaningfully.
And I think talking about where people are spending their time, we could probably take another 45 minutes here. But I got to thank you guys so much for your time. Please thank you. This was really great.